Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So before we start today's discussion, we have a couple of important announcements. Starting from today, we will be launching a new free initiative exclusively on the Unacademy app. Every Monday from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m., we shall be taking up the weekly summary of the PIB or the Press Information Bureau, which will help you cover important current affairs, especially those related to government schemes and initiatives. So do join me live every Monday at 2 p.m. on the Unacademy app, and the link is also provided in the community section of our YouTube page and also in the description box of this video. Then starting from tomorrow, every Tuesday we'll be starting with International Relations Weekly. This session will help you cover the important developments in international relations of the last 1 week, and it will take place live every Tuesday from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. So do join me live for both the sessions every Monday and Tuesday, and these sessions will help you cover important current affairs for your prelims and as well as for your mains. And also don't forget, the new online batch is starting from 28th Feb, and if you wish to enroll, you can contact us at this number, and we are also offering a special 50% discount on the prices. So with this, let's get started and look at the topics that we are going to discuss in today's The Hindu analysis. From the daily edition of The Hindu, I have chosen 7 important articles. There are 3 articles relevant for mains. We will carry out a detailed analysis of these articles, and 4 smaller articles which are important for prelims. So let's begin with the first column from page number 10 that deals with the topic of surrogacy. The article is examining the recent changes that have been done to the rules related to surrogacy law in India. This is a very big development, in fact, as far as surrogacy is concerned, because recently the Supreme Court has intervened to carry out some important changes that deal with the regulation of surrogacy in India. So let's understand what is the context, and let's understand the entire topic of surrogacy. What do you mean by surrogacy? What are the laws in India? What changes were done recently? Why is it controversial? And what is the recent ruling of the Supreme Court in this regard? So this will give us a complete picture on this important topic, which is relevant for governance and even for social issues as well. Potentially, this could be an essay topic as well. So first, let's look at the context. Recently, the government of India has modified the Surrogacy Rules 2022. The Surrogacy Act was enacted by the Parliament in 2021, and it came into force in 2022. So under the Surrogacy Act, the rules were notified by the government of India, and last year in 2023, a few changes were done to the provisions of surrogacy in India. These amendments that were done last year, they were challenged at the Supreme Court recently, and the Supreme Court has reversed these amendments. What was the change that was done last year? The change that was done was that it banned the usage of donor gametes in the process of surrogacy. I will explain this in detail, don't worry, we'll get into the complete nitty-gritties of this topic. As of now, just understand that last year, in March 2023, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare that regulates surrogacy in India had amended the rules which prohibited the usage of donor gametes in the process of surrogacy. Now, this restricted the options available for intended parents who wanted to have kids or children through the process of surrogacy. So a woman who was not in a medical condition to have or contribute her own gametes, her own eggs for the process of surrogacy, had approached the Supreme Court challenging the amendment done last year as it was unfair and against the very spirit of the law. The Supreme Court has protected the rights of this intended mother and has directed the government to amend the rules to reverse the changes that were done. Accordingly, the government of India has amended the rules again just last week and now it has allowed married couples to use donor eggs or donor sperms in case the parents are suffering from medical complications. If they are not able to contribute their own gametes, their own egg or sperm, in that particular case, married couples can rely upon donor gametes. So this change was recently notified by the government of India. So that is why the topic of surrogacy is in news. Now let's understand what exactly is surrogacy. What is the legal status of surrogacy in India? What are the different types of surrogacies that are there? And what kind of surrogacy is legally allowed in the country? Let's look at the provisions, the regulations related to the Surrogacy Act and the problems created through the new amendments. So let's take a look at this. Surrogacy essentially refers to, it's a process where a woman's womb is used to carry a fetus of another couple, right? Especially if the couple is not able to have a child of their own or on their own. Let's imagine A and B to be a married couple, husband and wife. They are, let's say, not able to have children on their own, primarily because the woman might have certain issues related to production of egg, or with regard to fertilization in the uterus, or with regard to the embryo latching onto the uterus. Due to certain medical complications, if the couple are not able to bear a child on their own, then they can rely on a surrogate mother. They can rely on a surrogate mother where they will donate their gametes. Let's say A is the man, the husband will donate the sperm, the mother B would donate her egg, and the fertilized embryo could be planted in the uterus of the surrogate mother. The surrogate mother will carry the fetus on behalf of the intended parents. So the parents who are not able to bear children on their own, who are relying on a surrogate mother, they are legally, technically referred to as intended parents, as they intend to become parents in the future and have a kid of their own. The other woman who is bearing their kid, who is bearing their fetus, becomes the surrogate mother. So this process of where an intended couple who can't have their own children, right, they rely on a surrogate mother to have a kid. So this process is called surrogacy. Now when it comes to surrogacy, there are two types essentially. Medically, there are two types. You have traditional surrogacy and gestational surrogacy. I'll explain that later. But with regard to the whole process, we have altruistic surrogacy and commercial surrogacy. Especially with regard to the legal framework, it's very important to understand what is altruistic surrogacy and commercial surrogacy. Then I'll explain the medical differences between traditional and gestational surrogacy. We'll come to that. In case of commercial surrogacy, obviously there is a commercial angle involved here. Essentially, the surrogate mother will be paid by the intended parents in order to bear their child. If there is a monetary compensation provided to the surrogate mother to incentivize a third woman to bear their child on their behalf, right? If that monetary transaction is involved, then that is a case of commercial surrogacy. It's being done primarily with the motive of money being involved, a money transaction being involved, and of course with the motive of helping this couple to have a kid of their own, right? So when there is a monetary transaction from the intended parents to the surrogate mother, that form of surrogacy becomes commercial surrogacy in the eyes of the law. When we say altruistic, what's the dictionary meaning of altruistic? It means selfless. As a selfless act, if a surrogate mother is ready to bear the children of intended parents without expecting any monetary compensation, without any monetary exchanges being involved between them, then that is altruistic surrogacy. Usually in altruistic surrogacy, the surrogate mother will be a relative of the intended parents. In many cases, the relative would be genetically related, genetically connected either to the father or the mother. So such form of selfless surrogacy is called altruistic surrogacy, where there is no exchange of money. According to Indian law, commercial surrogacy is prohibited. It is banned in India because when it was legal, it was heavily misused to exploit women from the weaker sections. Women from economically weaker sections were exploited, especially by the middlemen involved in the surrogacy process. Usually foreign couples from other countries who couldn't bear their own kids, they would rely on the process of surrogacy and they would be ready to pay as much amount as possible to ensure that a surrogate mother will bear their child. But this was misused by middlemen. An entire mafia nexus had developed where the middlemen would dupe women from weaker sections, lure them with money, pay them a small amount, and extract large sums of money from the intended parents. Essentially, the intended parents would be a little desperate to have a kid of their own. They would be willing to go to any distance to do anything possible, right? Irrespective of the money involved in order to have a child. So this would be exploited by the middlemen, by the whole mafia, which included the medical industry, few corrupt doctors, and the middlemen involved. In many cases, this has been linked with human trafficking as well, where foreign couples would have sponsored a surrogate mother in India, and later they might abandon the kid, and such children are pushed into human trafficking rings, into beggary, prostitution, etc. So this became a social menace, a social evil, where women from weaker classes were being exploited by luring them with money. The middlemen involved would be making a lot of money for themselves, and there was a big nexus between intended parents coming from other countries and the exploitation that was happening in India of women from weaker sections. So given the misuse of surrogacy, India banned commercial surrogacy after the implementation of the new act. From 2002 to 2015, commercial surrogacy was legal in India between 2002 and 2015 under the previous surrogacy laws. But given the scale of exploitation and the misuse of the law, and how women in particular were being misused, how the surrogate kids were being abandoned sometimes, pushed into human trafficking, because of all these reasons, commercial surrogacy was banned in India under the new law. This law was enacted in 2021. The ART Regulation Act, also known as the Surrogacy Regulation Act. ART stands for Assisted Reproductive Technology Act. Surrogacy is a form of assisted reproductive technology, where medical science is assisting intended parents to have a child of their own. So this act was brought out through the parliament, enacted in 2021. It came into force in 2022 under the rules that were notified by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Now, if you look at the provisions of this law, I'll take you through the provisions. Please take a look at it. And then we'll discuss the issues, the problems created by the law as well. For example, according to the Surrogacy Regulation Act, it is either a married couple, a married husband and wife, who are not able to have children on their own, or a single woman who's a widow or a divorcee within a specific age group. Only they are eligible for surrogacy. There is a lot of restrictions placed over here to ensure that surrogacy is not misused. So the intended parents, either they have to be a married couple, a husband and wife in a heterosexual relationship, right? Homosexual couples are not considered. That is why the law is criticized on various grounds, including the fact that it is against the rights of LGBTQ community. So homosexual couples are not eligible for surrogacy in India. It's only heterosexual married couples. Even couples in live-in relationship are not eligible. Those who are in a live-in relationship, members of LGBTQ community, right? They are not eligible under the law for surrogacy. It is very, very limited. It is available only to a heterosexual married couple or to a single woman who's a widow or a divorcee. These conditions have to be met. They have to be within the specified age group. They should be legally married under Indian law, right? And the specific age groups are also mentioned, which I have given over here. This law completely prohibited commercial surrogacy. That is, paying the surrogate woman for bearing their child was completely prohibited, which means only altruistic surrogacy is allowed in India. Only altruistic surrogacy is allowed. But however, there is a restriction on married couples and single women as well. It's not that every married couple or every single woman who's widowed or divorced can go and opt for surrogacy. They can't. Because the law says that the surrogate child who is born should be genetically related to at least one parent. So what does that mean? It means the gamete which is used, the sperm or the egg, it has to come at least from one of the parents. Now the challenge here is, what if both the parents are suffering from medical conditions? What if both are infertile? What if the husband and wife, what if both of them are infertile? And the law, which was recently amended last year, it banned donor gametes, meaning they can't take donor sperms or donor eggs. With this ban, couples who couldn't bear their own children, right, and if they had medical conditions which would make them infertile, they couldn't use the option of surrogacy, even though altruistic surrogacy was legalized. Even though it is legally allowed, they can't go through the process of surrogacy because the law says that the surrogate child should be genetically related to at least one parent. From at least one parent, the gametes have to be collected to provide for the surrogate child. So this became a restrictive provision. It essentially meant that when it comes to the two types of medical surrogacies that are there, only one of them is allowed in India, and it would become a very restrictive choice for the parents if they are medically unfit, if they are infertile, and if they are not able to bear their own children. Now let me explain this more clearly by talking about the two different types of surrogacies that are there. First, we have traditional surrogacy. In medical terms, there are two types of surrogacies. One is traditional surrogacy and the other is gestational surrogacy. Now, don't confuse this with altruistic and commercial surrogacy. That was with regard to the monetary part involved. Altruistic is selfless surrogacy where there is no money paid to the surrogate mother. Surrogate mothers are usually related to the intended parents. In commercial surrogacy, the surrogate mother was getting paid for it, which is banned in India. So that is a different form of classification of surrogacy, mainly on monetary grounds. But with regard to the process of fertilization, with regard to from where the gametes are drawn, from whom the gametes are drawn, surrogacy is medically classified into two types, traditional and gestational. So let us understand what these two surrogacies are, how does it work, and what is allowed under Indian law, and what changes have been done and how it affects intended parents. Now let's say there is a married couple, A and B. A is the husband, B is the wife. All right. Now, they're not able to conceive a child on their own. The husband has a healthy sperm count. The wife also is able to produce her eggs. But the only problem is the wife is not able to conceive the child. The embryo, either it's not getting fertilized or it's not getting attached to the uterus. So this is where the couple might rely on a surrogate mother. All right. In case of traditional surrogacy, the egg which is used for fertilization comes from the surrogate mother, not from the intended mother. Since the law says one gamete has to be from one of the parents, the father would donate the sperm and surrogate mother's egg would be used for an intrauterine fertilization. That is, the sperm of the father, the husband, the intended parent, right, is inserted into the surrogate mother to carry out intrauterine fertilization, and essentially this surrogate child will be genetically connected to the surrogate mother. The surrogate child will be genetically connected to the father as well, right? And connected to the mother as well. Before last year's amendment, donor gametes were allowed. Before last year's amendment, let's say, for example, if both father and mother, they are not able to provide their gametes due to a medical condition. Let's say the father is not able to provide healthy sperms, or even the mother is not able to provide a healthy egg. They could rely on donor gametes, especially from those who are genetically related to them. They could provide a donor gamete, and in traditional surrogacy, surrogate's mother's egg would be used for fertilization. So in traditional surrogacy, the surrogate child which is born is genetically connected partly to the mother, to the surrogate mother. Now this would create complications. Why? Now the surrogate mother would be attached, and not just genetically, there would be a higher degree of emotional attachment. So post-delivery, surrogate mothers would find it more difficult to part with their child, and this was leading to complications. So usually the traditional surrogacy route is not preferred, and in India it is not allowed. In India, it is only gestational surrogacy which is allowed. What is gestational surrogacy? In gestational surrogacy, the surrogate mother is not genetically connected or related to the child. How is this possible? Because it is possible by using only the gametes of the intended parents or the donors. Both the sperm and the egg would come from intended parents if it was viable medically, or it would come from donors. So surrogate mother would only be renting out her womb. Of course, since commercial surrogacy is not allowed, there is no option of renting out, there is no option of monetary compensation. If there was an altruistic angle, a selfless angle involved, the surrogate mother would only be providing her uterus to host the fetus. So surrogate mother's gametes would not be involved. Surrogate mother's egg will not be used in this case of fertilization. By using IVF techniques, in vitro fertilization, the gametes of the parents, intended parents, the sperm and egg of the intended father and mother, or if they are not medically viable, the sperm and egg of donors, this would be fertilized in a lab, and the surrogate mother would only carry the embryo and the fetus, would only carry the child. So in case of gestational surrogacy, the surrogate mother is not genetically connected to the surrogate child. So medically it's also proven that when there is no genetic connection between the mother and the child, the surrogate mother and the child, the chances of emotional connection is also less. It's not being ruled out, but it's a little more easier for the surrogate mother to let go of the child and hand them over to the intended parents after childbirth. So gestational surrogacy is what is allowed in India. All right. The law, when it was enacted in 2021, it banned commercial surrogacy, meaning no monetary compensation should be paid. There is only altruistic surrogacy allowed in India, and only gestational surrogacy is allowed, meaning surrogate's mother's gametes cannot be used. The gamete has to come either from donors or from the intended parents, right? So donor gametes were allowed under the law. But last year, the government did a change. In 2023 March, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare amended certain rules which prohibited the usage of donor eggs and donor sperms. Now, what will be the problem because of this? The problem is that what if both the parents are medically unfit to provide their gametes and use it for bearing their child? Due to infertility problems, what if the husband, what if the mother, the intended mother and father, what if they are not able to use their gametes? That was restricting their option of surrogacy. Since only non-commercial, altruistic, gestational surrogacy is allowed in India, right? If the intended father and mother are not medically fit to use their gametes for fertilization, they couldn't bear a child even through surrogacy process. The very purpose of this law was to help the parents who are not able to bear their own child to have kids. But through such restrictive provisions, by banning the usage of donor eggs and sperms, the law was restricting the rights available to intending couples or intending parents. So recently, a mother had approached the Supreme Court stating that she is medically not able to produce an egg. Medically, she is not in a viable condition to contribute her gametes. But since the law is restrictive, it is prohibiting the usage of donor gametes, she is not able to use the process of surrogacy, the route of surrogacy, to have a child. So she approached the Supreme Court challenging the validity of this amendment, saying that it defeats the very spirit of the law. It is against her fundamental rights as well. Her fundamental right to equality and other basic rights, which includes the right to have a child, was being curbed and restricted because of this unfair restriction brought in by the government. So in this landmark case, the Supreme Court has ordered the reversal of this amendment. And accordingly, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has again amended the rules, allowing donor gametes to be used in surrogacy. Is that clear? So last year's amendment had restricted the usage of donor gametes. Now, following the Supreme Court's intervention, donor gametes are allowed. But however, there are still problems. There are still restrictions. I'll explain that. Right now, the government has said, if a donor gamete is being used, then the intending couple have to get a certificate from a board which is established under the district magistrate. Under the district magistrate's chairmanship, a board is constituted which includes the health officers of the district as well. Essentially, medical professionals, doctors would also be part of this board headed by the DM. This board has to certify that the parents are suffering from a medical condition, they are not able to contribute their gametes. Only then a donor gamete can be used. Now, the process of certification is also fine. This is a checks and balance in the system to prevent the misuse of the laws. But the problem here is that what if both the parents are not in a medical condition to provide their sperm or egg? The law still says that the surrogate child should be genetically related to at least one parent. Right? Please understand this. Only gestational surrogacy is allowed, meaning surrogate mother's eggs are not used. So either the egg has to come from the intending mother, right? Or there can be a donor. Someone related to the mother or the father can genetically, who's genetically related, they can donate an egg, which can be used in the process of fertilization. But in that case, what if the father is infertile, right? Then they can't rely on another donor, because then the kid, the surrogate child, will not be genetically connected to either of the parents. If the parents are relying on donor sperm and donor egg, right? If medically they are unable to produce their gametes or use their gametes, it becomes a big restriction on them, because according to the law, the surrogate child has to be genetically related to at least one parent. So this is a big restriction, and as a result, it is curbing the right of even heterosexual married couples. So that is one major problem with the law which continues to persist. But that's not the only problem. There are other major issues with the law as well. Single women who are widowed or divorced, right? They will continue to face the ban on donor gametes. If not directly, indirectly. The ban has been lifted. But the problem is, what if the single woman who is widowed or divorced, what if medically she is unable to use her egg? Then she can't use a donor egg, because the law is saying that the surrogate child has to be genetically related to one of the parent. Is that clear? The law still says that the surrogate child should be genetically related. The surrogate child should be genetically related to one parent. In case of a single mother, a single intending mother who's widowed or divorced, right? If the intended mother is medically unable, medically not fit to produce her own egg or use her own egg for fertilization, then she can't use donor eggs as well, because in that case, the surrogate child will not be genetically related to her. which is not allowed under the law. So single women who are not in a medical condition to contribute their gametes are at a big disadvantage. Even married couples in a heterosexual relationship are at a disadvantage if both the parents are not in a medical condition to use their sperm and egg. And it also goes against the rights of the LGBTQ community. This is exactly what critics are pointing out. So in the recent case, which reached the doorsteps of the Supreme Court, a single mother had approached the Supreme Court stating that she is suffering from a medical condition, a medical syndrome, as a result of which she can't produce healthy eggs. So since the law restricts the surrogate child, right, has to be related genetically to one of the parents, the single mother cannot contribute her own eggs and she couldn't use donor eggs as well. First of all, there was a ban on using donor gametes. Now the ban has been lifted by the Supreme Court. But still there is a challenge. The challenge is that single women who are married, who are widowed or divorced, they can't use donor eggs if they are not in a medical condition to produce their own eggs. Because the law still says that the surrogate child should be genetically related to one of the parents. The law does not even recognize the rights of LGBTQ community and live-in couples. So many activists, many experts, legal and medical experts, civil society activists, they have all highlighted the persisting issues and problems with the law. The law is clearly biased against LGBTQ couples who are in a homosexual relationship. They cannot opt for the route of surrogacy in India. Even single intending fathers cannot opt for surrogacy. Live-in couples also don't have this right. Single women who is widowed or divorced, even they face a problem as they have to use their own eggs with a donor sperm, right? If medically the single woman is not able to contribute an egg, then they can't opt for surrogacy, which is restricting their right. Even married heterosexual couples, right, husband and wife, they can't go for surrogacy if both of them are medically not able to produce their own gametes. At least one parent should be able to do that. That is a restriction of the law. And as a result, parents, intending parents, right, who are not in that medical condition, they will have no other option. And as a result, the law has a lot of discrepancies that still exist. So that is what you should understand from this important topic. This could come as a possible essay topic as well, as it deals with important social issues, ethical issues, and governance-related issues as well. Now, before I proceed to the next article, please look at the schedule for this week with regard to NCERT Fundamental Series, which is going on. From 26th Feb to 2nd March, these are the NCERT classes being held from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. on the Unacademy app. We have economy classes going on by Sham sir. Once this ends, Abhishek sir will start with history NCERTs. So do attend these classes live at 7 a.m. in the morning. The links are provided in the video description. Now let's look at this important editorial on page number 8 that deals with space exploration. The article is connected to science and technology. The editorial is basically talking about the renewed focus of major countries, major spacefaring countries, with regard to lunar mission. Right now around the world, there is a renewed curiosity towards exploring the moon with regard to landing missions on the moon, to further explore the moon and even consider possible future settlements, human settlements. So many countries are in a race to reach the moon, especially the lunar surface on towards the South Pole, which is relatively unexplored, right? And there is a competition that has begun between various major countries and powers to step up their lunar exploration missions. As you all know, India recently succeeded with the Chandrayaan-3 mission. India successfully carried out a soft landing near the South Pole, and India became one of the few countries in the world which could achieve a soft landing on the lunar surface. Right? India successfully deployed a rover as well and carried out scientific studies and experiments on the lunar surface. The US and Russia, they have reached the lunar surface long ago. They have deployed humans as well, human astronauts on the moon back in the 60s and 70s, right? Soviet Union and the US, they were competing with each other during the Cold War to reach the moon and deploy astronauts on the moon as well, which they achieved quite successfully. But of late, Russia is facing challenges with its lunar missions. Recently, you might have read that Russia's Luna mission failed miserably. In fact, Russia launched its Luna mission almost parallelly to India's Chandrayaan-3 mission. It was expected to land before India's Chandrayaan-3. But Russia's Luna mission failed. It failed to achieve a soft landing, whereas India succeeded in its Chandrayaan-3 mission. Then other powers like China, then Japan, European countries and European Space Agency, they all have kept their eyes on the moon and they are stepping up their lunar exploratory missions. Japan recently succeeded with its SLIM mission, right? Even though it was seen as a partial success due to a complicated landing, the SLIM mission of JAXA, which is the space agency of Japan, was still seen as a success because of the unique path, the unique trajectory it employed to reach the moon surface. The US, through NASA and private space companies, has accelerated its lunar program. All right? The European Space Agency is also focusing on the moon and focusing on many upcoming lunar missions. And also, did you know India and Japan are planning a joint lunar mission? Please find out the name of this joint mission between ISRO and JAXA. India's ISRO and JAXA of Japan, they are planning a joint lunar exploratory mission in the coming months. So find out the name of the mission and please mention that in the comments below. So the point the editorial is raising is that all the major spacefaring powers are focusing back on lunar exploration. That is the prime focus here. Recently, a private space company from US achieved a successful soft landing. A private space company in the US called Intuitive Machines, or IM. It's a private space company of the US which is working in close collaboration with NASA. NASA is the public sector space organization of the US government. But in US, the space sector is completely liberalized. There are many private space companies working in this domain. You have popular companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and many others, which are doing incredible work in the field of space research, and they're all getting a lot of backing and support from NASA. In the US especially, there is very active collaboration between public and private space organizations. And there is a common vision of the US where NASA, along with the private sector, are having common goals, and NASA is assisting the private sector to achieve those common goals with regard to space missions and exploratory missions. That is why a company like Intuitive Machine could easily design a lunar landing mission and execute this quite successfully because it is part of the Commercial Lander Payload Services program of NASA. What NASA has done is that it has developed the core technologies and outsourced it to the private sector, and it expects private industries, private companies like Intuitive Machines, SpaceX and others to produce the components, to produce the launch vehicles, the landers, the payloads and the orbiters. Whereas NASA will focus exclusively on research and development. It will focus exclusively on cutting edge research. So that is the kind of synergy that US has built into its space program, where NASA collaborates very actively with the private sector. Private companies are backing NASA's long-term objectives and missions. And that is a kind of collaboration that the editorial is calling for in India and around the world. The editorial says that space exploration is very complicated. Even countries like Russia have failed. Countries like US have failed. India has failed in previous missions. China, Japan, they've all seen many failures in their previous missions. China has taken a leap forward through its Chang'e mission. Chang'e is the series of lunar missions of China. It has even launched a sample retrieval mission just a few years ago, right? So in that regard, China is ahead of India. India has just achieved a soft landing, but China not only achieved a soft landing, deployed rovers, it has collected samples and it is retrieving them back to Earth for further studies. So given the complexity of space research and these lunar missions, The editorial is urging upon all the countries to work together, to build international cooperation, to build public-private partnership. And it's only this cooperation that can take humanity forward with regard to space exploration, particularly lunar exploration. That is the core argument being made by the editorial. The editorial says that space exploration, lunar exploration should not be a competition. It need not be an intense competition like we saw during the Cold War between US and Soviet Union. Rather, there should be international cooperation as we are witnessing between India and Japan. Even between India and US, there is a lot of active collaboration between ISRO and NASA. Even between India and Russia, there is very close collaboration in the space domain. Even between India and France, India and European Space Agency, there is very close collaboration between these space agencies. So such international cooperation should become the norm in order to overcome the complexities of a space mission. Plus, there should be proactive public-private partnership. Public space agencies like ISRO, NASA, etc., they should create the right space for private sector startups to collaborate as well, whereas the public sector agencies can focus more on research and development. Now, India is already doing this. ISRO has already started outsourcing several space technologies. In fact, India's space sector has been liberalized over the years, and recently, just a few days ago, the government of India has approved 100% FDI through the automatic route into the space sector. At one point, space sector was completely regulated by the government. It was only limited for the public sector. No private sector was allowed, no FDI was allowed into the space sector. Today, we have not only privatized our space sector and allowed for many Indian startups to come up in the space domain, but we are also allowing FDI, and now it is 100% FDI through the automatic route. So more foreign investment can be attracted to fund the space startups of India, which are already collaborating with ISRO. So this is a great opportunity for India. Just like we have seen public-private collaboration in the United States, where NASA has collaborated with private companies to create a joint space program, right? That is the opportunity that lies in front of India as well. Along with that, if there is international cooperation between all the major space powers, then this is a big step for humanity because it will aid in our complex space missions and lunar exploratory missions. So that is what the editorial is calling for. Instead of competition between countries and big powers, instead of treating this as a geopolitical race, the editorial is urging upon space powers to cooperate with each other, to work together. And instead of restricting private sector, like India had done before, the editorial is calling for greater private participation and greater collaboration within each country between the public sector and the private sector. So it is such cooperation and collaboration which can take forward our space program and help us reach newer destinations and possibly scale up our lunar exploration, which could bring benefits for the mankind. So that is the core essence of this editorial. Now let's look at the third article from a mains point of view. We have a column on page number 9 dealing with budgetary allocation to India's education sector. This article is carrying out an assessment of the allocation made to the education sector in this year's interim budget. As you all know, at the start of this month, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman presented an interim budget. Since this is an election year, instead of presenting a full-fledged union budget, a limited interim budget was presented. And in this interim budget, the allocation made by the government to the education sector has declined as a whole. Compared to the previous estimates of the last year's budget, there is a significant reduction, particularly in the higher education sector. With regard to higher education, there is a significant cut in the budgetary allocation, and this is of great concern according to this column. The writer says that there has been only a marginal increase of 0.73% with regard to budgetary allocation for school education. if you look at budgetary allocation to higher education, there is a reduction of 16.8%. Allocation to higher education has been cut, slashed by 16.8%. So according to the writer, this is a significant reduction in budgetary allocation to higher education budget. In the school education budget, there is a slight increase, a very nominal, marginal increase of just 0.73%. Cumulatively, this accounts for hardly 2 to 3% of India's GDP towards the education sector. Now, this is what India has been spending on education. The public sector allocation for education, the budgetary allocation, has always been between 2 to 3% over the last few decades. This is way behind what other countries are allocating. For example, if you compare India with the BRICS countries, which are at a similar level of development, if you look at Brazil, South Africa, China, right, even Russia, they all have a significantly higher allocation for education, somewhere in the range of 3 to 4%. Some countries even have a allocation of up to 5% of their GDP towards education. But India is falling behind the curve. With just an allocation of 2 to 3%, we are falling short of an important declaration, the Incheon Declaration for Education 2030. This is a global declaration that was adopted in 2015. Please take a look at this. This is very important for your prelims as well. All right, the Hindu has made a mistake. I want you guys to correct this mistake. The Hindu has made a typographical error in this article today. It's not Education 2023. This global initiative, this global declaration that was adopted, it is Education 2030, adopted under the Incheon Declaration. Incheon is a city in South Korea, right? So that is where a global summit on education was organized by many UN-related organizations. This was called the World Education Forum. The World Education Forum, which was organized in the year 2015, it was hosted in the South Korean city of Incheon. Please make a note of this. It could be important for your prelims as well. So this World Education Forum was organized by various UN-related organizations and specialized agencies like UNESCO, the UN Population Fund, UN Development Program, UN Women, UNICEF, and even World Bank and UNHCR. All these global bodies were involved in organizing the World Education Forum in South Korea at Incheon in 2015. India was a very active participant. India was a strong supporter of this forum, and the UN countries adopted a declaration in 2015 known as the Incheon Declaration. They adopted a goal for education for 2030. So this initiative or this declaration, the Incheon Declaration, it's also called Education 2030. So this was basically a commitment towards achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which focuses on education for all. Is that clear? By 2015, the Millennium Development Goals of the UN was expiring. Through the United Nations, Millennium Development Goals were implemented from 2000 to 2015 for a 15-year period. These development goals were implemented under the MDG or Millennium Development Goals. After the MDG period, Sustainable Development Goals were brought in, the SDG goals, as part of Agenda 2030. This would be the development program that the world would follow for the next 15 years with regard to eliminating poverty, eliminating hunger, providing education for all, etc. 17 specific goals were identified under Sustainable Development Goals Initiative, which was an upgrade of the previous Millennium Development Goals. So the target for the next 15 years was identified under Agenda 2030, and one of the important goals was SDG number 4, which was to achieve education for all. So with this goal in mind, the countries participating at the World Education Forum, they adopted a resolution and brought out the Incheon Declaration declaring Education 2030 as their target. India was one of the lead promoters of this goal. So through the Incheon Declaration, the countries committed, the UN countries committed to increase the allocation for education to 4 to 6% of their GDP instead of just the 2 to 3% average allocation that was being made by most of the countries. Since India itself was falling behind and India was hardly allocating 2 to 3% of its GDP to education, we brought many countries together along with the leadership of other countries and organizations. We committed to this global goal of increasing the GDP allocation, the budgetary allocation, to 4 to 6% of a country's GDP. But India is still falling behind the curve despite the Incheon Declaration. Even today, our budgetary allocation for education is just around 2.8% of our GDP. As I told you, we are still behind other BRICS members as well. So given this fact, the reduced allocation in the interim budget is a concern according to the writer of the column. The writer says there is a big slash in higher education budget. There's a substantial cut, more than 60% reduction in the grants provided to the UGC, the University Grants Commission. Is that clear? There's only a nominal increase in school education budget, 0.73% increase. And even this is mainly focused on the PM Shri initiative, the PM Schools for Rising India initiative launched by Prime Minister Modi. That has been prioritized along with Ekalavya schools and the new residential model schools coming up. Only for that, there is a slight increase in budgetary allocation, less than 1% increase. Here the writer says the government has placed a condition. If states and schools have to receive this additional funds for infrastructure improvement, they have to fully implement the National Education Policy of 2020. This has been made a precondition. Now, as you know, National Education Policy has been controversial. It has been opposed by many state governments, by many schools and boards. They're not fully aligned with the goals and the vision of National Education Policy. So now that government support is being made conditional under PM Shri initiative, PM Schools for Rising India, and the new Ekalavya model residential schools, right? The condition is that to receive the funds, they have to fully align with the National Education Policy. So this in a way is arm twisting the state governments and the schools and the boards to oblige with the NEP, right? Which is already controversial. They're saying the center is using this as an arm twisting tactic to force the state governments and schools to fall in line and follow the National Education Policy. So the minor increase in the budget may not have a desired impact. This marginal increase may not even be sufficient, right? And even to receive that additional funds, states will have to align completely with the goals of National Education Policy. If you look at higher education, there is a big slash of around 60% in the allocation for UGC, and even the allocation for IITs, IIMs, and other higher education institutions has been cut down quite drastically. The government is saying that this is quite justified. The slash in higher education budget is justified because the government is setting up a new agency called HEFA, the Higher Education Financing Agency. It's being set up by the Ministry of Education in collaboration with Canara Bank. So this new agency will provide loans to fund your higher education in the coming years. The government is saying the UGC need not provide grants anymore. Instead, HEFA, the Higher Education Financing Agency, will provide concessional loans to students who are opting for higher education. But according to the writer, this is also problematic. See, UGC was a public sector organization. Its goals were aligned with the inclusive goal of achieving education for all. Now, you may not see this happening if banks are providing loans, right? If this financing agency is distributing loans for higher education, these loans may not be affordable for everyone, right? Maybe middle class families, upper middle class families will be able to afford the loans. But what about those coming from marginalized and weaker sections? The writer is talking about gross enrollment ratio, which is already falling in our higher education sector. If you look at weaker sections like scheduled tribes, if you look at OBC communities, scheduled castes, and even the enrollment of women in higher education, there is a significant decline in their enrollment ratio. In many cases, it's because they are not able to afford the higher cost of education. To study in elite engineering medical colleges, to opt for higher education in India, it has become very expensive, and families from marginalized and weaker sections are not able to afford that. Their only hope was the grants that were provided by the UGC. Right? University Grants Commission would provide these concessional grants which would fund the education of many students in higher education from the marginalized sections. So now with reduction of the budget for UGC, reduction of budget for higher education, government is relying on a loan providing agency which is being established, the Higher Education Financing Agency, to provide loans to fund their education. So honestly, the writer has doubts about whether the weaker sections can benefit from this, because they may not be able to afford these loans. They may not be able to repay those loans. Students from scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, women students, right, who are already having a higher dropout rate when it comes to higher education, they could be further disincentivized if the loan cost increases and if it becomes unaffordable for them. So these are the key issues being highlighted by the writer, and the writer is expressing concern about India's very low budgetary allocation for education. Just around 2.8% of our GDP is not enough, because it doesn't even match the Incheon Declaration commitment India had made. India had led other countries in 2015 at the World Education Forum to commit everyone that we will increase our budget to 4 to 6% of our GDP. But we are still stuck with 2.8%, under 3% of our GDP allocation. And this, according to the writer, is not sufficient for the education sector, right? So these are the key takeaways from this important column. I feel all the three articles are very, very relevant for the mains exam. Now let's take a look at the prelims section, and we'll quickly go through the small articles related to prelims. Now please look at this image on page number 4. The Hindu carries this image where Muslim worshippers from the Shia community in Kashmir, they are offering their prayers on the occasion of Shab-e-Barat, which is a very important festival in the Islamic calendar. Yesterday and today marks this festival, Shab-e-Barat. It is widely marked across South Asia, in India, in Pakistan, Bangladesh. It is also widely celebrated in West Asian countries amongst the Muslim community, in countries like Iran, Iraq, even Turkey. It is also celebrated in Central Asia and also in many Southeast Asian countries, and even in some East Asian countries, from Philippines to Japan to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, all these countries, right? This important festival is marked and celebrated, which is Shab-e-Barat. Now, what is this festival all about? During this festival, right, Muslims basically pray to Allah and they ask for forgiveness. They ask for their sins to be forgiven, all their wrongdoings to be forgiven. They are not just asking for the forgiveness of the God for their sins and their wrongdoings, they are also praying on behalf of their ancestors. Now, what is interesting is that this tradition seen across Asia in the Muslim community is quite similar to other traditions seen in Hinduism and Buddhism as well. You might have heard about Pitru Paksha in Hinduism, right? It's very similar, where the Hindu worshippers, they pray to the God asking for forgiveness even to the wrongdoings of their ancestors on their behalf, hoping for a peaceful future, a stable future. So this tradition of Shab-e-Barat is very similar to that. So many experts draw a comparison between these traditions. In Buddhism as well, there is a tradition where the Buddhist followers, they ask for forgiveness from Buddha even on behalf of their ancestors. So Shab-e-Barat is very similar to that. It is celebrated across Asian countries within the Muslim community, and this is something you should be aware of, right? Please be aware of its significance and the connections of this tradition across different religions. Next, we have another article related to history on page number 6. This article is related to a very important finding related to the Chalukya dynasty, the Badami Chalukyas in particular, right? One of the most progressive, stable empires, kingdoms to have existed in southern parts of India was that of the Chalukyas. They ruled the Deccan region between the 6th to 12th century, and they have left an incredible mark behind in this particular region. You can see the rough extent of the Chalukyan Empire, covering largely today's Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana and Maharashtra, right? The seat of capital was located over here towards northern Karnataka in the Banavasi region. Banavasi is closer to the North Karnataka region. It was the seat of power of the Kadambas as well. But the Chalukyas established a formidable rule in this part of the Deccan region between the 6th century to the 12th century. They made an immense contribution to Kannada literature, right? And as well as to Telugu literature. They were great patrons, supporters of Kannada and Telugu literature. They contributed immensely to temple architecture across this region. You might have heard about the caved temples of Badami, right? The Aihole temples. These landmark temple features that are found across this region, North Karnataka, Andhra, Telangana and Maharashtra, they're all attributed to Chalukyan architecture, particularly the Badami Chalukyas, who were seated at Badami, which is today in northern Karnataka near Bijapur. All right. Now, why is this topic in news? The topic is in news because there is a new temple discovered in a small village in Andhra Pradesh on the banks of the Krishna River. On the banks of the Krishna River at a village known as Muni Manikyam. This temple, which was discovered, inscriptions and evidence, archaeological evidence has been found linking it with Badami Chalukyas. Now, this is a very big and significant development because this increases the extent of the territory that was ruled by the Badami Chalukyas. Previously, it was presumed that Badami Chalukyas had their influence only until this stretch of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana region. They ruled primarily from here, from the Vatapi region. They dominated all the way from Narmada to Godavari, to Krishna and Tungabhadra river, stretching all the way till the Kaveri river in southern Karnataka. This was the extent of their influence in a north-south direction. In an east-west direction, their influence extended from the west coast till the coastal plains. But now the finding of Badami Chalukya temples on the Krishna river over here, very closer to the coastal belt of Andhra Pradesh, it changes our very understanding of the Chalukyan Empire, of the Badami Chalukyas. The place where this new temple has been discovered, it's at least 500 kilometers away from the previously understood boundaries of the Chalukyan Empire. Right? Inscriptions have been found over here. Archaeological evidence has been found connecting it with Badami Chalukyan architecture. And more importantly, evidence has been obtained to show the religious diversity that prevailed under Badami Chalukyas. It clearly shows that along with Hinduism, Brahminism, even Buddhism and Jainism was flourishing under the Badami Chalukyas. Along with Hinduism being the dominant faith, Buddhism and Jainism also thrived, and those evidences have been found at this temple on the banks of the Krishna river in the Muni Manikyam village. So this gives you an opportunity to dive deeper into the Chalukyan Empire, the Badami Chalukyas, and their immense contribution to today's Karnataka, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh region. So please read more about this. Read more about their contribution to Kannada literature and Telugu literature, their contribution to temple architecture, right? This is very, very significant as part of India's history. Next, we have another article from Art and Culture. There's an article on page 6 referring to a very important festival which is marked in Kerala, the Attukal Pongala. This festival is also popularly referred to as Women's Sabrimala. Just like Sabrimala pilgrimage is largely restricted to men, right, and non-menstruating women, over here, this festival, which is marked at a very important temple near Thiruvananthapuram, this festival is largely celebrated and marked by women worshippers. Men are usually not allowed here. So this is also referred to as Women's Sabrimala. It's an annual event that takes place at the historic Attukal Bhagavati temple in Thiruvananthapuram. This is where the festival is held. So as part of this 10-day festival, it's a 10-day festival which is marked. On the 9th day, the women worshippers, they cook a special offering to the god. They basically make a pudding, which is nothing but very similar to the pongal, the sweet pongal dish. They use rice, jaggery, coconut, and even banana. And they cook this sweet pudding offering and they offer this to the deity of Attukal Bhagavati temple. Now, why is this significant? This is significant because the Attukal Bhagavati temple in Thiruvananthapuram has a lot of historical cultural significance. It also finds a mention in the Tamil epic Sila Padikaram. In this Tamil epic text, there is a reference of a character by the name Kannaki. Kannaki, who believed that her husband had been wronged, she unleashed her anger against Madurai, destroying the temple town of Madurai before taking shelter at this temple in Thiruvananthapuram. And according to this Tamil epic, Kannaki is none other than the incarnation of the deity, that is Attukal Bhagavati. So it's a women deity which is worshipped here, Attukal Bhagavati, at this temple, and this god is believed to be an incarnation of this epic character called Kannaki, who took revenge for the injustice done to her husband by destroying Madurai, and then she took shelter at this temple in Thiruvananthapuram. That's the legend, the myth. So there's a lot of religious belief associated with this practice, and it's primarily women worshippers who come to this temple, pray for 10 days and provide a religious offering. The Pongala is cooked and offered in earthen pots. So please be familiar with such cultural traditions, because UPSC could always pick art and culture questions based on these topics. Next, on page number 13, there's a reference to a bridge which was inaugurated by Prime Minister Modi yesterday in Gujarat. Here you can see the longest cable-stayed bridge which has been built in the Dwarka region of Gujarat. You can see the map over here. This is the Dwarka region in the Kathiawar peninsula of Gujarat. Over here you have an island called Bet Dwarka, which is also believed to be the site which is closer to the ancient city of Dwarka, mentioned in Hindu literature and in Hindu mythology. Right? The Prime Minister even went diving. I'm sure all of you would have seen those images as well, where he offered his prayers to Lord Krishna and tribute to the submerged city of Dwarka. So there is an important bridge which has been built, the Sudarshan Setu, which connects Okla or Okha, which is the tip of the Kathiawar region in Dwarka, with this small island called Bet Dwarka. So this is the longest cable-stayed bridge in India, and it's called Sudarshan Setu. Just a small point for your prelims. So on this note, I would like to conclude the discussion for today. Please take a look at the mains practice questions. Both the questions are based on what we have discussed with regard to Surrogacy Act and Surrogacy rules and space exploration. Please use them for your answer writing practice and post your answers in the comment section below. So I hope you guys have liked today's session. If you did, please let me know through your comments. Do let me know what you think of the new initiatives that we are launching, not just on the Unacademy app, but also on YouTube. Just wait for a few more days. We are going to launch many more exciting initiatives to help you prepare for the upcoming exams. Our goal is to make this channel a one-stop destination for English medium civil services aspirants. So do let us know what you think, and do support us in these initiatives with your likes, your comments, share the videos with other aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. I'll see you tomorrow Thanks for watching.